The cargo ship moved through space like a slow fish swimming through a dark ocean. It was called the Stillwater Dream, and it belonged to the Velan species. The Velans were tall creatures with 6 arms and skin that looked like polished silver. They had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, long before humans ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. Captain Raylo stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the stars slide past the windows. He was old even by Velan standards. His silver skin had turned slightly gray at the edges, and 2 of his 6 arms moved slower than they used to. But his mind was still sharp, and he had made this journey more than 50 times. The Orion Passage was a simple route. 3 months of travel between the Kepler colonies and the Galactic Trade Hub. Nothing exciting ever happened. The ship carried boring things like mineral rocks, synthetic food proteins, and machine parts. Relos liked it that way. He was too old for adventure. His crew was small but experienced. 12 beings from different species, all of them professionals who knew their jobs. There was Boro, the chief engineer, a heavy creature with rock-like skin and 4 thick legs. There was Thessa, the navigator, who belonged to the Kavani species. She looked like a large moth with soft wings and big compound eyes that could see in almost complete darkness. There was Vosik, the medical officer, a thin being with too many joints in his arms and a face that always looked worried. They were a good crew. Quiet, professional, boring in the best possible way. But there was one thing on this voyage that was different from all the others. In Hold 7C, deep in the belly of the ship, there was a cryopod. It was a simple metal box with a glass window on top, filled with cold gas that kept whatever was inside in a deep sleep. The pod had no name on it, no manifest number, no passenger identification. The only marking was a small label that said medical transport and priority customs clearance. Someone had paid a lot of money to put that pod on the Stillwater Dream. The payment came from a human research station on one of the outer colonies. The money was good, and the instructions were simple. Deliver the pod to the trade hub, ask no questions. Relos did not like mysteries, but he liked money, and the fee for this delivery was enough to pay his crew for 3 extra months. So he took the job and told everyone to leave the pod alone. The crew did not care much anyway. Humans were not very interesting to most species in the galaxy. They were small, fragile creatures with soft skin and short lives. They lived maybe 80 or 90 years, which was nothing compared to a Valen's 300 or Kavani's 500. Humans had only discovered space travel about 200 years ago. They were still new to the galactic community, still learning how things worked out here among the stars. Most species thought of humans the way a grown adult might think of a small child. Cute, sometimes clever, but not very important. Thessa, the navigator, wrote in her personal log every night before she slept. On the 15th day of the voyage, she wrote, "Another boring run. The human pod sits in Hold 7C like a forgotten piece of luggage. Probably some scientist who died on a failed colony mission, being sent home for burial. Humans die so easily. Their bodies cannot handle much. Too hot, they die. Too cold, they die. Not enough air, they die. Too much radiation, they die. I wonder sometimes how they survived long enough to build rockets." She was not being cruel. She was simply stating what everyone in the galaxy believed to be true. Humans were delicate. Humans were weak. Humans needed constant care and perfect conditions just to stay alive. The days passed slowly on the Stillwater Dream. The crew followed their routines. Boro checked the engines every morning and every evening. Thessa plotted their course and made tiny adjustments to keep them on the fastest path. Vosik organized his medical supplies and complained that no one ever got sick on these voyages, so he had nothing to do. Captain Relos walked the corridors of his ship, checking everything, talking to everyone, making sure all was well. The cryopod in Hold 7C remained silent and cold. Its monitors showed a single heartbeat, slow and steady like a drum being hit once every 10 seconds. Whatever was inside was alive, but just barely. The deep freeze kept the body in a state between life and death, waiting to be woken up at the end of the journey. No one checked on it more than once a week. No one thought about it much at all. On day 20, they passed a beautiful nebula. It was a cloud of purple and gold gas, bigger than 1,000 solar systems, glowing with the light of newborn stars. The crew gathered at the observation windows to watch it pass. Even Captain Relos, who had seen this nebula many times before, stopped to appreciate its beauty. Thessa took photographs to send to her family back home. Boros simply stared, his rock-like face showing no expression, but his four hands pressed flat against the window like a child at a candy store. Vosik made notes about the radiation levels and worried that they might be too high, even though they were perfectly safe. It was a nice moment, a peaceful moment, the kind of moment that makes space travel feel worth all the danger and loneliness. None of them knew that in 11 days their ship would be dying. None of them knew that the fragile human creature sleeping in Hold 7C would be the only thing standing between them and death. None of them knew that everything they believed about humans was wrong. But for now, they watched the nebula and felt at peace. Captain Relos returned to the bridge after the nebula had faded from view. He sat in his command chair and looked at the star map on the main screen. They were right on schedule. No problems, no delays. Everything was exactly as it should be. He allowed himself a small smile. This was going to be another easy voyage, another simple delivery, another quiet run through the Orion Passage. In Hold 7C, the cryopod's monitors flickered for just a moment, a tiny glitch, so small that no alarm was triggered. Inside the pod, behind the frosted glass, a finger twitched. Something was beginning to wake up. Boro was checking the power systems in the lower decks when he heard the alarm. It was a soft sound, not the loud screaming alarm that meant danger. This was a gentle beeping, the kind that said something needed attention, but was not an emergency. He followed the sound to Hold 7C. The cryopod was making the noise. Its control panel was flashing with yellow lights, and the small screen showed words that made Boro's rock-like heart feel suddenly cold. Revival sequence initiated. The pod was waking up its passenger, by itself, without anyone giving the command. Boro hit his communication badge with one thick hand. "Captain, you need to come to Hold 7C. Now, we have a problem." Captain Relos arrived 4 minutes later with Vosik, the medical officer, close behind him. They found Boro standing in front of the cryopod, his forearms crossed over his chest, watching the glass window with worried eyes. The frost on the glass was melting. Through the clearing window, they could see a shape inside. A small body, a human body, a young woman with black hair and pale skin, wearing a thin medical gown. Her eyes were still closed, but her chest was moving. She was breathing faster now, her body warming up, her systems coming back online like a machine being turned on after a long sleep. "How did this happen?" Captain Relos asked. His voice was calm, but his 6 arms were tense. "I do not know," Boro said. "The pod activated by itself. I did not touch anything." Vosik was already scanning the pod with his medical equipment. "Her vital signs are increasing. Heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity. She is waking up completely. We cannot stop it now without risking serious damage to her." They stood and watched as the revival process continued. The pod made soft humming sounds as it pumped warm air inside and injected revival drugs into the woman's blood. Her fingers began to move. Her face twitched. Her eyes moved behind closed lids like she was dreaming. Then she opened her eyes. For a moment, she simply stared at the glass above her, seeing nothing, understanding nothing. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and there was confusion in them. Deep, terrible confusion. Then she started to scream. The sound was horrible. It was the scream of someone who did not know where they were, who did not remember how they got there, who was waking up to a nightmare they could not understand. She beat her fists against the glass, her movements weak and clumsy from months of frozen sleep. "Open the pod," Captain Relos ordered. Boro pressed the release button, and the glass lid hissed open. The human woman sat up immediately, still screaming, still swinging her fists at enemies that were not there. Vosik tried to approach her with a calming injection, but she knocked it from his hand and fell out of the pod onto the cold metal floor. She crawled backward until her back hit the wall. Then she pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. She was shaking badly. Her screams had turned into sobs, then into rapid breathing, then into silence. She stared at the 3 aliens in front of her with eyes full of fear. "It is okay," Captain Relos said slowly. using the simplest words in Galactic Common. "You are safe. You are on a ship. No one will hurt you." The woman did not respond. She just kept staring, her chest rising and falling too fast. Vosik approached carefully this time, moving slowly, keeping his many-jointed hands where she could see them. "I am a medical officer. Can you tell me your name?" The woman's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She tried again. Her voice was rough and broken, like she had not used it in a very long time. "Yuna," she whispered. "My name is Yuna." They brought her to the medical bay and gave her water and food. She ate like someone who had forgotten what eating felt like, taking small bites, chewing slowly, sometimes stopping to just hold the food in her hands and stare at it. Vosik ran every scan he could think of. "She is malnourished," he reported to Captain Relos. "Dehydrated. Her muscles have lost significant mass from the long cryo sleep. Her bone density is low. She is very weak." "Can she tell us why she was in that pod?" Relos asked. Yuna could speak Galactic Common, but not well. Her accent was thick, and she often stopped to search for words. But slowly, piece by piece, she told them what she remembered. She had been a terraforming engineer on a colony called New Busan. It was a human settlement on a planet that was supposed to become a new home for thousands of people. But something went wrong. She did not remember exactly what. There was an emergency, an evacuation. People were running and screaming. Someone in a medical uniform grabbed her arm and pulled her into a room. She felt a needle in her neck. Then everything went black. "That is all I remember," she said, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm water. "Then I woke up here." Captain Relos did not know what to make of her story. He had never heard of a colony called New Busan, but that meant nothing. Human colonies failed all the time. They were not very good at survival. "You were supposed to stay frozen until we reached the trade hub," he told her. "Someone paid a lot of money to transport you. Do you know who?" Yuna shook her head. "I do not know anything. I do not even know what year it is," Relos told her. Her face went pale. "I have been asleep for 2 years," she whispered. The crew did not know what to do with her. A live passenger meant extra food, extra water, extra air. It meant legal problems when they reached port. It meant paperwork and questions and delays. But they could not put her back in the pod. And they could not throw her out an airlock. So they gave her a small cabin near the medical bay and told her to stay out of the way. Yuna did as she was told. She spent most of her time alone, sitting on her bed staring at the wall. Sometimes she walked slowly through the corridors, looking at everything with curious eyes. The crew avoided her mostly. She made them uncomfortable in a way they could not explain. Thessa wrote in her log, "The human is awake. She is small and sad and seems very lost. I feel sorry for her, the way one feels sorry for a wounded animal. She will probably spend the rest of the voyage crying in her cabin. Humans are so emotional. It must be exhausting to feel everything so strongly." No one on the ship thought much about Yuna after those first few days. She was just a problem to be delivered, a piece of cargo that had accidentally turned itself on. She was fragile and weak and unimportant. They had no idea how wrong they were. In her small cabin, Yuna sat alone and stared at the wall, but her eyes were not empty anymore. Behind them, her mind was working, remembering, calculating. She had been an engineer on New Busan. She had kept 5,000 people alive for 3 years on a planet that was trying to kill them every single day. She had fixed machines that should not have been fixable. She had solved problems that should not have been solvable. She had survived things that should not have been survivable. She did not know why she was on this ship. She did not know who had put her in that pod or why. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not weak. And soon everyone on this ship would understand that. Day 44 began like every other day on the Stillwater Dream. Captain Relos drank his morning tea on the bridge. Thessa checked the navigation charts and confirmed they were still on course. Boro ran his routine inspection of the engines. Vosik organized his medical supplies for the 100th time. Yuna ate breakfast alone in her small cabin. She had grown stronger over the past 2 weeks. She could walk without getting tired now. She could eat full meals without feeling sick. But the crew still treated her like a ghost, something to look through rather than look at. She did not mind. She used the time to explore the ship, to learn its systems, to understand how it worked. The Stillwater Dream was not the most advanced ship she had ever seen, but it was solid and well-maintained. Boro clearly knew his job. At exactly 11:47 ship time, everything changed. The ship dropped out of hyperspace with a violent lurch. It was like being inside a car that suddenly hit a wall at full speed. Everyone who was standing fell down. Equipment flew off tables. Lights flickered and died. Then the alarms started, not the soft beeping alarms, the loud ones, the ones that meant something was very, very wrong. Red emergency lights filled every corridor with bloody color. A computerized voice spoke calmly through the speakers, but the words were not calm at all. Warning. Reactor containment failure. Warning. Coolant system breach. Warning. Backup systems offline. Captain Relos pulled himself off the floor and ran to the engineering console. His 6 arms moved across the controls, pulling up damage reports, system diagnostics, emergency protocols. What he saw made his silver blood run cold. The main reactor core had cracked. Coolant was leaking into spaces where coolant should never be. The backup power systems, which should have activated automatically, were completely dead. The ship was dying, and it was dying fast. "Boro, report," Relos said into his communication badge. His voice was steady, but only because he had practiced being calm in emergencies for 200 years. Boro's voice came back, filled with static and fear. "Captain, the reactor is failing. I do not know why. One moment everything was normal. The next moment we have cracks in 3 different places. I have never seen anything like this. How long do we have?" There was a pause, a long, terrible pause. 6 hours, maybe less. After that, the reactor goes critical. The explosion will destroy the ship instantly. Relos closed his eyes for a moment. 6 hours. In 6 hours, everyone on this ship would be dead. There was no way to call for help. They were too far from any station. No rescue ship could reach them in time. They were completely alone in the dark between stars. He opened his eyes and looked at his crew. They were all on the bridge now, called by the alarms, standing in the red emergency light with fear on their faces. Thessa's wings were shaking. Vosik's many joints had gone stiff. Even Boro, who was usually as steady as the rocks he resembled, looked scared. "We are going to fix this," Relos said. He did not believe it, but he said it anyway. "Everyone to their emergency stations. Engineering crew, follow me to the reactor room. We will find a way." They tried. For 2 hours, they tried everything they could think of. They attempted to seal the cracks with emergency patches. The patches melted. They tried to reroute the coolant through different pipes. The pipes burst. They tried to restart the backup systems. Nothing responded. The temperature on the ship began to drop as the heating systems failed. The Velen crew members started to slow down. Their species had evolved on a warm moon, and cold made their blood thick and their minds foggy. Thessa collapsed first. Her wings froze to her back, and her compound eyes became dull and unfocused. 2 other Kavani crew members fell soon after. Vosik wrapped them in thermal blankets and reported to the captain with chattering teeth. "Core temperature is dropping too fast. In 2 more hours, most of the crew will be unable to function. The cold is killing us." Relos knew he should feel the cold too, but he was too focused on the dying ship to notice. He stood in the reactor room, staring at the cracked containment vessel, watching the poisonous coolant drip onto the floor. He had run out of ideas. He had run out of hope. They had 4 hours left to live. And then he heard footsteps behind him. Human footsteps, soft and light on the metal floor. Yuna walked into the reactor room like she belonged there. She was wearing the same thin clothes she had been given when she woke up, and her feet were bare. The floor was cold enough to hurt, but she did not seem to notice. "Show me the schematics," she said. Relos turned to look at her. For a moment, he was too surprised to speak. This small, fragile human, standing in a room filled with radiation and leaking coolant, asking to see technical documents for a Velan reactor she could not possibly understand. "This is not a place for passengers," he said finally. "Go back to your cabin where it is safer." "Nowhere on this ship is safe," Yuna replied. Her voice was different now. Not scared, not confused. Cold and clear like ice. "In 4 hours, we will all be dead, unless someone fixes the reactor. Show me the schematics." Boro stepped forward, his rocky face twisted with frustration. "You are a human. What could you possibly know about Valen reactor technology? Yuna looked at him. Her dark eyes were steady and calm. I spent 4 years keeping a dying colony alive, she said. Our reactor was older and more damaged than this one. We had no spare parts. We had no help coming. We had children who needed heat and light and air. I learned to fix things that could not be fixed. I learned to make something from nothing. I learned to keep people alive when the universe wanted them dead. She paused. Her voice softened just slightly. I know I am just a human to you. I know you think my species is weak and fragile. But right now, everyone on this ship is going to die unless someone does something different. So you can send me back to my cabin and die in 4 hours. Or you can show me the schematics and let me try to save us. The reactor room was silent except for the hissing of leaking coolant and the beeping of warning alarms. Captain Relos looked at this small human woman with her bare feet and thin clothes standing in a pool of deadly radiation like it was nothing. He thought about his crew, freezing on the bridge. He thought about the 6 hours that were now down to 4. He thought about how everything he believed about humans told him she could not help. Then he thought about dying and decided that trying something impossible was better than accepting defeat. Borrow, he said quietly. Show her the schematics. The engineer hesitated. Then he walked to the main engineering console and pulled up the complete technical plans for the Stillwater Dreams reactor system. Yuna stepped up to the screen. Her eyes moved across the diagrams, the numbers, the complex systems that had taken Valen engineers centuries to develop. She studied everything for exactly 4 minutes. No one spoke. No one moved. They just watched her read. Then she nodded once and turned to face them. I know what to do, she said, but you will have to trust me completely. Can you do that? Captain Relos looked at Borrow. Borrow looked back at him. Neither of them could believe what they were about to say. Yes, Relos said. We trust you. Yuna smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad, but there was something else in it too. Something hard, something strong. Good, she said. Then let us get to work. We have a ship to save. Yuna did not waste time explaining her plan. She simply started giving orders like she had been the captain of this ship her entire life. Your coolant system uses a closed-loop design, she said, pointing at the schematic on the screen. That means the same liquid goes around and around, getting hot, getting cold, getting hot again. It is efficient when everything works, but when something breaks, the whole system fails. That is what happened here. Borrow stepped closer to look at where she was pointing. Yes, but the cracks are in the secondary manifold. We cannot seal them. The heat is too high for any patch material. We do not need to seal them, Yuna said. We need to go around them. Look here. Her finger traced a path on the diagram. Your atmospheric processors use a separate cooling system, smaller but functional. If we connect it to the main reactor loop, we can bypass the damaged manifold completely. Captain Relos frowned. That system was not designed for reactor cooling. The pressure alone would destroy it. Not if we reduce the pressure first, Yuna said. We vent the excess heat into hold 3. It will make that section of the ship very hot, but no one needs to go there. The pressure drops, the bypass holds, and we buy ourselves time. How much time? Relos asked. 18 hours instead of 4. Enough to reach the emergency beacon range near Talvor Station. Borrow was shaking his head, but it was not disagreement anymore. It was amazement. This could actually work, but the connections will have to be made manually. The automated systems are offline. I know, Yuna said. I will do it. You. Borrow's voice was sharp with disbelief. The connection points are in the maintenance ducts. The temperature in there is over 60 degrees. No being can survive that for more than a few minutes. Yuna was already moving toward the door. Humans can survive temperatures up to 70 degrees for short periods. Our bodies are designed to release heat through sweat. It will hurt, but I will live. She stopped at the door and looked back at them. Get me the tools I need. Connector cables, pressure seals, and thermal tape. And someone needs to watch the monitors and tell me when the pressure is dropping. I will watch the monitors, Relos said. He still could not believe what was happening, but he had made his choice. He would see it through. Borrow, go with her, the captain continued. Stay at the entrance to the maintenance ducts. You cannot go inside because of the heat, but you can pass her tools and relay information. The engineer nodded. His rocky face was unreadable, but his movements were faster now. Less afraid. He was starting to believe. They gathered the supplies in 3 minutes. Una stripped off her outer clothing until she was wearing only a thin undershirt and shorts. She tied her black hair back with a piece of torn fabric. She looked even smaller now, even more fragile. But her eyes were not fragile at all. Her eyes were hard as stone. The entrance to the maintenance ducts was a small square opening in the wall near the reactor room. Hot air poured out of it like breath from a dragon's mouth. Boro could feel the heat from 5 steps away, and he instinctively moved back. Una did not move back. She stood directly in front of the opening and let the hot air wash over her face. "Are you sure about this?" Boro asked. His voice was rough with something that might have been respect. "No," Una said honestly, "but being sure is not required. Only doing it is required." She picked up the bag of tools and climbed into the duct. The heat hit her immediately. It was like crawling into an oven. The metal under her hands and knees was hot enough to burn, and she could feel her skin starting to redden. Sweat poured down her face, into her eyes, making it hard to see. Every breath felt like fire in her lungs. She kept moving. The duct was narrow and dark. Her only light was a small torch strapped to her head. The walls pressed in on her from all sides, and the heat seemed to get worse with every meter she crawled. She could hear the distant hum of the dying reactor, like a wounded animal moaning in pain. "First connection point coming up," Raylo said through the communication badge she wore on her collar. 10 meters ahead, on your left." Una reached the first point and found the junction she needed. Her hands were shaking from the heat, but she forced them to be steady. She cut the old connection with a small laser tool, then attached the bypass cable and sealed it with thermal tape. The whole process took 4 minutes. It felt like 4 hours. "Connection 1 complete," she reported. Her voice was hoarse from the hot air. "Moving to point 2. "Be careful," Boro's voice came through. "The temperature is increasing. You need to move faster." Una did not answer. She just crawled forward into the burning darkness. The second connection was harder. The junction was partially melted, and she had to use her bare hands to hold the components in place while she made the seal. Her palms burned. She could smell her own skin cooking, but she did not let go until the connection was secure. "Connection 2 complete," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper now. "Only one more," Relos said. "You are almost there, Una. You can do this." The third connection point was the deepest in the duct system. By the time Una reached it, she could barely see straight. The heat had become a living thing, pressing against her, trying to crush her. Her heart was beating too fast. Her head was pounding. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to turn back. She thought about the crew on the bridge. She thought about Thessa, frozen and helpless. She thought about Captain Relos, who had trusted her even though everything he knew told him not to. She thought about New Busan, about the 5,000 people who had depended on her, about the children who had looked at her with such hope, about the day the rescue ships finally arrived and everyone had cried with joy. She could do this. She had to do this. The third junction was the worst one. A pipe had burst nearby, and superheated steam was filling the small space. Una could feel it scalding her arms as she worked. Her hands were blistered now, the skin peeling away in strips. But she kept working. Cut the connection, attach the bypass, seal it tight. "Connection 3 complete," she said. The words came out as a croak. "Una, get out of there now," Relos commanded. "The pressure is already dropping. The bypass is working." Una turned around in the narrow duct. Her vision was going black at the edges. She could not feel her hands anymore. She started crawling back toward the entrance, but her arms kept giving out. She fell on her face once, twice, 3 times. She could see light ahead, the entrance, safety, cool air. She was not going to make it, and then she felt something grab her ankle. Something strong and rocky and warm. Boro had reached into the duct as far as he could go, ignoring the heat that was burning his own stone skin, and caught her. He pulled her out of the duct like she weighed nothing. She tumbled onto the floor of the corridor, gasping and shaking, her body covered in burns and her hands wrapped in blisters. Boro knelt beside her, his rocky face filled with an emotion she had never seen from him before. "You did it," he said. "The bypass is holding. The pressure is stable. You actually did it." Una tried to speak, but no words came out. Her throat was too dry, too damaged by the hot air she had been breathing. Vasek arrived with medical supplies and began treating her burns immediately. "She needs serious care," he said, "but she will live. How she survived that heat for so long, I do not know. By all medical standards, she should be dead." Captain Raylos walked over and stood looking down at the small human woman on the floor. Her skin was red and blistered. Her hands were ruined. She looked more dead than alive. But the ship's alarms had stopped screaming. The reactor was stable. They had time now. They might actually survive. "Thank you," Raylos said quietly. It was not enough. No words were enough. But it was all he had. Una looked up at him with pain-filled eyes and managed a tiny nod. Then she passed out, and Vasek carried her to the medical bay to begin the long process of healing. The first crisis was over, but the night was far from finished, and the hardest part was still to come. Una slept for 2 hours. When she woke up, she immediately tried to get out of the medical bed. "You cannot be serious," Vasek said, pushing her gently back down. "Your hands are severely burned. Your body temperature was high enough to cause organ damage. You need at least 12 hours of rest before you can even think about moving." Una looked at her hands. They were wrapped in thick bandages filled with healing gel. The gel was cool against her skin, slowly repairing the damage. It felt strange, like her hands belonged to someone else. "How is the ship?" she asked. "Stable for now. Your bypass is working. We have about 16 hours before we need to worry again." Una nodded. Then she sat up, despite Vasek's protests. "What about the crew? How many are still functional?" Vasek sighed. He had learned in the past few hours that arguing with this human was pointless. "The cold has affected most of the crew. The Valen are moving slowly, their reactions delayed. 3 of the Kavani are in medical shock. Only Captain Raylos and Boro are still fully operational, and even they are struggling." "And you?" "My species tolerates temperature changes better than most. I am tired, but I can function." Una swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her whole body ached. Every breath hurt. Her hands throbbed with pain that the medication could only partly block. But she had felt worse before. On New Busan, she had worked for 3 days straight without sleep, while a radiation storm threatened to kill everyone. This was nothing compared to that. "Take me to the bridge," she said. "I need to see the damage reports." Vasek opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He had seen what this human could do. He had watched her crawl through temperatures that should have killed her, make repairs that should have been impossible, save a ship full of people who had dismissed her as weak and useless. He was starting to understand that humans were not what he had always believed them to be. On the bridge, Captain Relos was standing at the main console, studying data streams with tired eyes. When Una walked in, he turned to look at her with an expression somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. "You should be resting," he said. "I will rest when everyone is safe," Una replied. She walked to the console and began reading the damage reports. "The bypass is holding, but there are other problems. Your life support is running at 60%. Your navigation systems are damaged. And there is something wrong with the hull near Section 7. Relos looked at her with new eyes. She had been awake for less than 10 minutes, and she already understood the ship's condition better than most of his crew. "The hull problem is minor," he said. "A small crack, easily repaired from inside." "No," Una said. She pointed at a data stream that Relos had not been paying attention to. "Look at the pressure readings. The crack is getting bigger. In about 4 hours, it will breach completely." Relos felt his blood go cold again. He had missed this. In his exhaustion, focused on the reactor, he had missed a second disaster waiting to happen. "Can we seal it from inside?" Mai asked. "No, the angle is wrong. It has to be done from outside." From outside, in the vacuum of space. In temperatures cold enough to freeze anyone solid in seconds. The next 12 hours became a nightmare of constant work and constant fear. Una refused to rest. She moved from problem to problem, crisis to crisis, her burned hands wrapped in fresh bandages that she ignored completely. When a plasma conduit began leaking, she was the one who crawled under the floor panels to seal it. The conduit was hot enough to burn through Valen's safety gloves. Yuna grabbed it with her bare hands already damaged and held it in place while Boro applied the sealant. Her face showed no pain. Her voice showed no strain. She simply did what needed to be done and then moved on to the next task. When the oxygen recyclers started failing, she took them apart piece by piece, found the problem, and fixed it with tools that were never designed for the job. She used parts from broken equipment, wire from damaged systems, and her own creativity to make machines work that should have been impossible to repair. The crew watched her with growing amazement. This small human, who should have been dead 10 times over, kept working. She did not stop to eat. She did not stop to drink. She did not stop to complain about the pain that must have been incredible. At hour 8, Thessa woke up from her cold-induced shock. The first thing she saw was Yuna walking past the medical bay, carrying a heavy piece of equipment that should have required 2 people to lift. "What is happening?" Thessa asked weakly. Vasek was at her side immediately, checking her vital signs. "The human is saving us," he said. There was wonder in his voice. "I do not understand how, but she is saving all of us." At hour 10, Yuna sat down for the first time since she had woken up. She drank a cup of water and ate half a protein bar. She did this in exactly 4 minutes, then stood up and went back to work. Boro found her in the engine room singing. He stopped at the doorway and listened. It was a strange sound, a low humming that rose and fell in patterns he did not recognize. She was moving her face close to the walls, to the pipes, to the machinery, and singing at them. "What are you doing?" he asked. Yuna did not stop singing. She held up one finger, asking him to wait. The humming continued for another minute. Then she stopped and marked a spot on one of the coolant pipes with a piece of chalk. "There is a microfracture here," she said. "Too small to see, but I can hear it. The resonance changes when air leaks through." Boro stared at her. "You can hear a fracture in a pipe by singing at it?" "Yes. Sound waves bounce differently off damaged material. I learned this on New Busan. We did not have proper scanning equipment, so I had to develop other methods." She picked up her tools and began repairing the fracture. Boro watched her work, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. In the medical bay, Vasek was updating his records. He had started a new file titled Human Capabilities, Field Observations. The document was already several pages long, and he kept adding more. "Pain tolerance," he wrote, "far beyond galactic averages. Subject continues to function despite burns that would incapacitate most species." "Thermal resistance," he continued. "Subject survived environmental temperatures of 65 degrees for extended periods. No protective equipment. This should not be possible based on known human biology. Endurance. Subject has been active for 10 consecutive hours with minimal food and water. Shows no signs of significant deterioration. Problem solving under stress. Exceptional. Subject identifies solutions that trained VLAN engineers failed to see. Demonstrates creative thinking that exceeds standard parameters." He paused and added one more line. "Conclusion. Previous assessments of human capabilities were severely flawed. Subject demonstrates abilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about the species. Further study required." At hour 11, Captain Ralos called Yuna to the bridge. His voice was heavy when he spoke. "The hull breach," he said. "It is worse than we thought. It will fail in 3 hours. If we cannot seal it, we will decompress completely. Everyone will die." Yuna looked at the data on the screen. She looked at the crack in the hull, growing slowly like a wound that would not stop bleeding. She looked at the cold void of space outside the ship, waiting to rush in and kill everyone. "The repair must be done from outside," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, but our EVA suits are designed for Velan bodies. None of them will fit a human." Relos paused. "And even if they did, the temperature outside is negative 200 degrees. No suit can protect against that completely. Anyone who goes out there will die." Yuna was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes were distant, looking at something only she could see. "I can make a suit," she said finally. "It will not be perfect. It will not be safe. But it might work long enough to complete the repair." Relis understood what she was saying. She was offering to go outside, into the killing cold, with equipment she would build herself from spare parts. She was offering to risk her life again, after everything she had already done. "I cannot ask you to do this," he said. Yuna smiled. It was the same small, tired smile she had shown before. "You are not asking. I am offering. There is a difference." She turned and walked toward the cargo holds, already planning what materials she would need. Behind her, Captain Relos watched her go and felt something he had not felt in 200 years of traveling the stars. He felt hope. The makeshift EVA suit was ugly. It was made from cargo wrapping, emergency insulation blankets, and pieces of an old spacesuit that had been stored in the maintenance closet for 50 years. The helmet was a modified emergency breathing mask with extra sealing around the edges. The gloves were 3 layers of different materials held together with industrial adhesive. Yuna worked on it for 2 hours while the hull crack slowly grew larger. Boro helped her, passing tools and holding pieces in place while she sealed them together. He did not speak much. There was nothing to say. The rest of the crew had gathered in the observation room near the airlock. Even the ones who were still weak from the cold had dragged themselves there to watch. Thessa's wings were still frozen, but her eyes were clear, and they followed Yuna's every movement. "It will not hold for long," Yuna said when the suit was finished. She was speaking to Captain Relos, but everyone could hear her. "The seals are not perfect. I estimate 6 minutes of safe operation before the temperature begins to break through. After that, I will have maybe 2 more minutes before the cold becomes fatal." "The repair will take at least 4 minutes," Boro said. "That leaves you only 2 minutes to get back inside." "I know. The airlock cycle takes 90 seconds. If you are not inside the airlock when the suit fails, you will freeze to death before we can retrieve you." "I know," Captain Relos stepped forward. His silver face was tight with emotion. "This is suicide. I cannot allow you to do this." Yuna looked at him with calm eyes. "Captain, in 2 hours the hull will breach. Everyone on this ship will die. Every member of your crew. Every being who trusted you to bring them home safely. They will all die, gasping for air in the cold darkness of space." She picked up the ugly helmet and held it in her blistered hands. "I am one person. If I die out there, but the ship survives, that is a good trade. That is the only trade that matters." "You are not just one person," Relos said. His voice was rough. "You have saved us already, many times over. You owe us nothing more." Yuna smiled. It was the saddest smile Relos had ever seen on any face, human or alien. "On my colony," she said softly, "we had a saying. When things were at their worst, when it looked like we would not survive another day, someone would always stand up and say, 'Not today.' It meant that death was coming, but we would not accept it. We would fight. We would struggle. We would do whatever it took to live one more day." She put the helmet on and began sealing it to the suit. "Not today, Captain. I am not going to let anyone die today, not if I can prevent it." Relos had no response. He simply stepped back and let her finish. The airlock was cold even before it opened to space. Yuna stood alone in the small chamber, her breath fogging the inside of her makeshift helmet. Through the tiny window in the outer door, she could see stars. Millions of stars, beautiful and deadly, and impossibly far away. "Yuna!" It was Thessa's voice on the communication channel. The navigator had insisted on being the one to guide her through the repair. "Can you hear me?" "I hear you." "The breach is located 12 meters from the airlock, on the starboard side. You will need to use the handholds to move along the hull. Do not let go for any reason. If you drift away from the ship, we cannot retrieve you in time." "Understood." "Yuna." Thessa paused. Her voice was shaking slightly. "Thank you. For everything." Yuna did not respond. She was saving her breath, her energy, her focus. Everything she had was going into this one task. The outer door opened, and space reached in to grab her. The cold was beyond anything she had ever felt. It was not like the cold of winter or the cold of the cryopod. It was the cold of absolute emptiness, the cold of nothing at all. It seeped through her suit immediately, finding every weak spot, every imperfect seal. She stepped out onto the hull of the Stillwater Dream. The ship looked different from outside, larger somehow and more fragile. She could see the damage now. The blackened sections where systems had failed, the frost covering every surface. And there, about 12 meters away, she could see the crack. It was longer than she had expected, a jagged line running across the hull like a wound. She began to move. The handholds were spaced about a meter apart, bolted to the hull for exactly this kind of emergency. Una grabbed the first one and pulled herself forward. Her hands were numb already, the cold cutting through her gloves like they were made of paper. 3 minutes, Thessa said in her ear. Temperature in your suit is dropping fast. Una did not answer. She just kept moving, handhold by handhold, meter by meter. The stars spun slowly overhead as the ship drifted through space. She reached the crack in 5 minutes. It was worse up close. The metal had buckled inward, creating a gap about 30 centimeters long. She could see tiny crystals of ice forming around the edges as the ship's atmosphere leaked slowly into the void. Beginning repair, she said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, slow and thick. She pulled the patch from her belt. It was a piece of emergency hull material, flexible enough to mold to the damaged surface, but strong enough to hold against the pressure difference. She pressed it against the crack and activated the bonding agent. The agent needed 60 seconds to set properly. Una held the patch in place and counted. 1, 2, 3. The cold was spreading through her body now. Her fingers were completely numb. Her arms were starting to lose feeling. She could see frost forming on the inside of her helmet from her own breath. 20, 21, 22. Una, your core temperature is dropping below safe levels, Vosik said over the communication channel. You need to return to the airlock now. She did not move. She kept holding the patch. 40, 41, 42. Her legs were going numb. She could feel the cold creeping up her spine, reaching for her heart. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges. 55, 56, 57. The patch is set, Thessa said. Una, let go. Come back, please. Una released the patch. It held firm against the hull, sealing the crack completely. The repair was done. Now she just had to get back. She turned and looked at the airlock. 12 meters away. It might as well have been 12 kilometers. Her body did not want to move anymore. The cold had stolen her strength, her coordination, her will. But somewhere deep inside her, in the part of her that had survived New Busan, that had kept 5,000 people alive through 3 years of hell, something refused to give up. She grabbed the nearest handhold and pulled. 1 meter, 2 meters, 3. Her movements were slow now, clumsy. Her hands kept slipping on the metal. She could not feel her fingers at all. 5 minutes, 30 seconds, Thessa said. Her voice was filled with fear. Una, you have 30 seconds before your suit fails completely. 4 meters, 5 meters, 6. The airlock seemed to be getting farther away instead of closer. Una's vision was tunneling, darkness closing in from the edges. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, slow and irregular. 7 meters, 8 meters. Her left hand slipped off the handhold. She hung there for a terrible moment, held only by her right hand. Swinging in the void, the stars spun crazily around her. Una! Multiple voices shouted through the communication channel at once. She reached up with her left hand and grabbed the next hold. Pulled, reached, grabbed, pulled. 9 meters, 10 meters, 11. The airlock door was right in front of her. She could see the emergency lights flashing inside, see the warmth waiting for her. She reached for the handhold next to the door. Her fingers touched metal, and then her suit failed. The cold rushed in like a killing wave of absolute zero that washed over her entire body at once. Her muscles locked, her lungs seized, her heart stuttered, but her hand was already on the handhold. And even as the cold tried to take her, she used the last of her strength to pull herself forward through the airlock door, into the chamber beyond. The inner door was still open. She fell through it and landed hard on the floor of the ship. Behind her, the outer door slammed shut automatically. Air rushed into the chamber. Warmth began to creep back into the frozen space. Una lay on the floor, not moving. Her eyes were open, but they saw nothing. Frost covered her entire body, her face, her hair. She looked like a statue made of ice. Vosik reached her first. He pressed his medical scanner against her chest and held his breath. There is a heartbeat, he said. Weak and irregular, but there. She is alive. Captain Raylos sank to his knees beside her frozen form. His 6 hands were shaking badly. How? He whispered. How can she be alive? No one had an answer. They carried her to the medical bay and began the slow process of warming her body. Her core temperature had dropped to levels that would have killed any other species instantly, but her heart kept beating, her lungs kept trying to breathe, her brain kept fighting to stay alive. Hours later, when she was stable enough to move to a recovery pod, Boros stood at the observation window and watched her sleep. "What are humans?" he asked quietly. "What are they, really?" No one answered, but everyone who had witnessed what Una had done was asking themselves the same question, and none of them would ever look at humans the same way again. Talvor Station appeared on the navigation screens like a gift from the universe. It was a massive structure, a ring of metal and glass spinning slowly against the background of stars. Ships of 100 different designs were docked along its outer edge, and lights twinkled from thousands of windows where beings of all species lived and worked. The Stillwater Dream limped toward the station like a wounded animal finding its way home. Its hull was scarred and patched. Its systems were running on backups and emergency power. It looked like it should not still be flying, but it was flying, and everyone inside was alive. Captain Rayla stood on the bridge and guided his ship through the final approach. His 6 arms moved across the controls with practiced ease, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in the medical bay, where a small human woman lay in a recovery pod, fighting her way back from the edge of death for the second time. "Stillwater Dream, this is Talvor Station Traffic Control." The voice came through the communication system, professional and slightly bored. "You are cleared for emergency docking at Bay 47. Medical teams are standing by. Please state the nature of your emergency." Raylos did not know how to answer that question. What could he say? That his ship had almost exploded, almost frozen, almost broken apart. That a human woman who weighed less than his smallest crew member had saved them all through sheer stubbornness and impossible endurance. That everything he thought he knew about the galaxy had been proven wrong in the span of 40 hours. "Reactor failure," he said finally. "Hull breach. Multiple injured. We have one critical patient who requires immediate advanced medical care." There was a pause on the other end. "Understood, Stillwater Dream. Bay 47 medical teams are ready to receive patients. Welcome to Talvor Station." The docking was smooth despite the ship's damaged systems. The moment the seals connected, a flood of station personnel poured through the airlock. Medical teams in bright uniforms rushed to the medical bay. Engineers in heavy suits began assessing the damage. Officials with data pads started asking questions that no one on the crew could properly answer. Una was taken away on a floating stretcher, still unconscious, still wrapped in thermal blankets, still looking more dead than alive. Vosik went with her, refusing to leave her side, carrying his medical records and his observations like precious cargo. The rest of the crew was taken to a recovery area where they were given warm food, comfortable beds, and endless questions from curious officials. What happened out there? How did you survive? Who repaired the ship? The answers they gave did not seem to satisfy anyone. 3 days passed before Una woke up. She opened her eyes in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by machines she did not recognize. The walls were white. The air smelled like medicine. Her body felt strange, disconnected, like she was floating slightly above herself. "Good morning." The voice belonged to a medical officer, a tall being with blue skin and gentle eyes. "Or good afternoon, technically. You have been asleep for quite a while." Una tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. The medical officer gave her water, small sips at first, then more when she did not choke. "Where am I?" she managed to ask. "Talvor Station Medical Center. You arrived 3 days ago in critical condition. Your core temperature was lower than any human we have ever treated before. Honestly, you should not have survived." The medical officer smiled slightly. "But you seem to be very good at surviving things you should not survive." Una let that information sink in. 3 days. She had lost 3 days to unconsciousness. But she was alive. The ship had made it. The crew was safe. "The others," she said. "Captain Raylos. The crew. Are they okay?" "Everyone survived, thanks to you, from what I understand." The medical officer made some notes on a data pad. "There are quite a few people who want to talk to you when you are feeling better. Some from the Galactic Transit Authority, some from the Valan government, Some from human diplomatic services? The officer paused. And your former captain has been waiting outside this room for 3 days. He refuses to leave. Relos came in an hour later, after the medical officer had finished the basic examinations. He looked different than Una remembered. Older somehow. More tired. But his silver eyes were bright with something she could not identify. He stood at the foot of her bed for a long moment, saying nothing. His 6 arms hung at his sides, unusually still. I do not know what to say to you, he said finally. In 200 years of traveling the stars, I have never seen anything like what you did. I have never met anyone like you. Una tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. She settled for turning her head to look at him more directly. I just did what needed to be done. No? Relos shook his head slowly. You did what should have been impossible. What no other being in the galaxy would have even attempted. You walked into fire. You crawled through temperatures that should have killed you. You went into the void of space with nothing but spare parts and hope, and you came back alive. He moved closer to the bed. His voice was soft now, almost reverent. We thought humans were fragile. We thought you were delicate creatures who needed protection from the dangers of the universe. We were wrong. We were so completely wrong. Una was quiet for a moment. She thought about New Busan, about the years she had spent keeping people alive in a place that wanted them dead, about the things she had learned to do, the limits she had learned to push, the impossible situations she had learned to survive. On my colony, she said softly, we used to joke that Earth was a death world. Our planet is covered in natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanoes, floods. The animals hunt each other constantly. The weather changes without warning. Even the plants can be poisonous. She smiled weakly. We evolved to survive all of that. Our bodies are designed to take damage and keep going. Our minds are built to find solutions when there are no good options. She looked at Raylos with tired eyes. We are not fragile, Captain. We just look fragile because you have never seen what we can do when we have no other choice. Over the next several days, Una became something of a legend on Talvor Station. The story of what she had done spread through the docks and markets and gathering halls. Beings of every species stopped to stare at her when she finally left the medical center, walking slowly with a support cane, her healing hands wrapped in clean white bandages. Some of them bowed. Some of them saluted in the military style of their homeworlds. Some of them simply stood in silence, watching her pass with expressions of wonder and respect. The crew of the Stillwater Dream gathered for a final meeting before they all went their separate ways. They met in a small conference room overlooking the station's main docking bay. Through the windows, they could see ships coming and going, an endless stream of life moving through the stars. Thessa spoke first. She had recovered fully from the cold, and her wings caught the light as she moved. I have submitted my official report to the Transit Authority. I tried to describe what you did, Una, but the words do not seem adequate. How do you describe someone who refused to let death win? Boro nodded his rocky head. I have been an engineer for 60 years. I have seen many things, but I have never seen anyone work like you work. I do not understand how your body did not simply break. Vosik held up his datapad. I have sent my medical observations to the Galactic Medical Council. They do not believe me. They think I have made errors in my measurements. They say no human could survive what you survived. He smiled his worried smile. I told them to come and see for themselves. Captain Ralos was the last to speak. He stood up from his chair and walked to where Una was sitting. Then slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to his knees. It was a gesture of profound respect among the Valan, a gesture reserved only for those who had saved lives. Una had seen it described in cultural databases, but she had never seen it performed. You saved my ship, Relo said quietly. You saved my crew. You saved me. I do not know how to repay that debt. I am not sure it can ever be repaid. Una looked at him, this ancient silver-skinned captain kneeling before her. She looked at the crew gathered around them, aliens from distant worlds, watching her with something that looked remarkably like awe. She should say something profound, something meaningful, something that would match the weight of this moment. Instead, she shrugged. The movement made her healing shoulders ache, but she did not care. I was just doing my job, she said. Captain Relo stared at her. For the first time in his 200-year career, for the first time since he had taken command of his first ship as a young officer, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he found that he had absolutely nothing to say. He was completely, utterly speechless. And somewhere in the room, Thessa began to laugh. Then Boro joined in, his laughter like rocks tumbling down a hill. Then Vasek, his worried face transformed by joy. And finally, even Raylos allowed himself a small smile. They laughed together, this strange family that had been forged in fire and cold and desperation. They laughed because they were alive. They laughed because they had survived. They laughed because a small human woman had looked at the universe and said, "Not today." And somehow, impossibly, wonderfully, the universe had listened. Outside the window, the stars continued their endless dance. Ships came and went. Life continued throughout the galaxy. And in a small conference room on Talvor Station, a human woman sat surrounded by aliens who would never again underestimate her species. The story of the Stillwater Dream would spread across the galaxy in the months and years that followed. It would change how other species thought about humans. It would open doors that had been closed. It would start conversations that needed to happen. But that was all in the future. For now, Yuna was simply glad to be alive. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and listened to the sound of her new friends laughing. It was, she decided, a very good sound indeed.